Hello, everybody, and welcome to the ALS United Mid-Atlantic Goals podcast. My name is Tony Heil, and I have been hosting this podcast for almost a year now as we talk to people about their different perspectives when it comes to ALS. We've hosted people who are living with ALS, people who are caregivers, our staff, including nurses and social workers, board members, and even people outside the ALS community because we're united in our mission to fund more research and to improve things for caregivers and those living with diseases like ALS through things like accessibility. Today, I'm really excited to talk to my friend Charles Poeppelman. He is with Synchron. He was recently at our ALS United Mid-Atlantic annual celebration, which was, I think, a great success. I had a good time, and I think everyone else there too. And Synchron is doing some amazing work with technology, BCI, brain computer interface, which we've discussed on this podcast before in a couple different ways. And it's going to take all of us working together to improve technology, which will improve the quality of life for people living with ALS. And not only will it improve quality of life for people living with ALS, but also for their caregivers and for people with other diseases as well. Charles has nearly a decade working with people with ALS, so great experience understanding not just the technology, but understanding people and their human connection to this technology and what it means for them. So I think we're going to learn a lot today, and I hope it's useful for you. And so I encourage you to subscribe, listen, share, comment, because this information is educational for everyone out there. So Charles, thank you so much for speaking today. I've been excited to do this since we met.
Oh, thank you so much, Tony. I appreciate you having me.
So before we go too far into this, you do market development. You're at Synchron. What is Synchron, and what do you do there?
Yeah, definitely. So, as often happens with clinicians, sometimes they end up moving and having unique career trajectories. And I've been fortunate that I've been able to be in the assistive technology space, working with different really unique technologies in terms of access for patients with ALS and others for, again, nearly 10 years. Synchron's a neurotechnology company based out of Brooklyn, New York. They're developing a minimally invasive brain-computer interface, which is essentially a technology that's like a thought-controlled keypad or mouse that allows a patient to use their thoughts to interact with others in their immediate environment, to communicate, to also be able to control different digital devices. As you had said, mentioned, I co-lead market development here at Synchron, which is essentially building a new care pathway for patients with ALS, for however the technology gets indicated, really connecting the dots between providers that chronically manage the patients, organizations like ALS United Mid-Atlantic that support the patients and their families out in the community, and really sort of building that story into how this technology is going to help these patients.
So I've talked about BCI in the past on this podcast with Dr. Grogan and Dr. Geronimo from our Penn State Health Hershey Medical Center team. But for those listening, what is BCI for a regular person to understand?
Yeah, definitely. And you've definitely have some wonderful connections you just mentioned there with Dr. Geronimo as well. So brain-computer interface is not a new technology. It's been around for, nearly 25 years, actually maybe more than that. And so the concept is taking neural signal and being able to get it out of the brain in a functional way to allow a patient to be able to control different technology. So in this case, how the FDA goes about labeling it, and they were the first regulatory body back in 2021 to designate a brain-computer interface as a motor neural prosthesis. So essentially, basically an extension of the mind. And you can think about the easiest way to think about this is having a patient think about completing a motor movement. So they think about squeezing their hand, they think about pressing their gas pedal, and being able to turn the thought of movement into either a navigational icon or a selection like a switch.
And are you an expert in what all that means? Do you have to be an expert in all of the neural networks to look at that, to do the work you do, or do you have other people that can be the experts in that kind of biology and understanding how the technology works?
I love the question, Tony. So I never pretend to be an expert, and definitely there are many folks very fortunate at Synchron that there's a wonderful data science and neuroscience team that's dedicated to sort of understanding a lot of those neural signals and decoding them. really what we're trying to build is actually a bridge so that you don't have to be, a neuroscientist or a data scientist to understand how this technology works. So in a functional sense, what we really want to do is design something that has a very low cognitive effort for patients. So the idea here, Tony, is, a patient thinks about doing a motor movement that they've done maybe their whole life, or an activity that they've been doing their whole life, and we can take the idea of completing the motor movement, even if their hands don't move, because let's say the progression of their disease, we can take that movement, the thought of movement, and continue to make it functional for patients. So to answer your question, no, you do not need to be an expert, and we're working very hard at trying to demystify the technology. And we can get into this in a little bit, but as you might well imagine, expectations are kind of everywhere. We have some patients that really all they want is to be able to have a 24/7 call caregiver alert, a call button that they can access without needing to physically move. And other times we have, maybe folks out there that want to control their car or fly a drone using a brain-computer interface. So expectations are all over the place, and we're trying to do as best we can to demystify the technology and talk to the right people so that we can make sure everybody's informed.
It reminds me that there are a number of things that we take for granted in science, from riding a bicycle to acupuncture, that until recently or not at all, we don't understand how they work. We just understand that they do. And so sometimes with BCI, I'm sure you work with your team and have an approach where the product is working for BCI, and you can see that it's getting the results you wanted, and maybe you don't understand all of it, but you can kind of guide a pathway for you for the development, knowing that, okay, we don't have to understand everything about the brain, but we can understand that when they do the X, Y, and Z, it's producing these positive results.
You're exactly right, Tony. And even to branch off from that, what we've been able to see is, again, over the last 25, almost 30 years, there's never been a clinical indication or reason for why a patient would go to their doctor and get a brain-computer interface. It's for what reason, right? And so developers, as well as payers, regulators, there's an organization called the IBCICC. It's the Implantable Brain-Computer Interface Collaborative Community. And the idea of that space is for regulators, for payers, for developers, for academics to come together to talk about different things that are going to be needed to get to a place where you can get an indication for this technology. Like, how are we going to pay for it? How are patients are going to be able to access it, right? It's important to be able to discuss now so that once we get to a place where we could potentially, have the efficacy information of what a BCI can do for a patient, it's important that we, have it be a fundable solution. Otherwise, we will have failed the vast majority of patients. And so thinking about the technology, how we can discuss it openly to the public is very, very important, certainly.
So, how do you work with the clinic team and other professionals to set those expectations and explain things to patients and caregivers?
Yeah, well, a lot of it is partnering with the community, partnering with organizations such as ALS United Mid-Atlantic. We've been very fortunate that since 2022, we've been collaborating with Team Gleason. They've been wonderful partners. As you can imagine, there's two different ways you can look at clinical trials, or you can look at technology or advancements in technology with regard to trying to solve or trying to make this disease more livable. So either we have pharmaceutical trials and drug trials that help with life elongating potential, right? And in our case at Synchron, our technology is not solving this disease, but we're very much aligned with making this disease more livable. So what we have to do is we have to work with the organizations that understand the technologies, for instance, that these patients use. What are the gaps that patients are experiencing? Who all communicates with the patient in their home, and how does the patient prefer to communicate, or what barriers are they seeing out in the community? And so to answer your question, there's both the clinical arm, working with those neuromuscular neurologists in some of those clinics that you had mentioned across the country to inform them that, hey, there's this emerging technology that's coming into ALS care. Here's what it is. Here's what it's not. And there's also the advocacy organizations that support these patients and really drive a lot of the community-based education. So what we have to do is we have to work really kind of across the spectrum of the entirety of the ALS community to ensure that the right folks are informed.
And I appreciate that you already had some experience with the ALS community before working on this technology or doing the outreach over these years because that personal touch means so much to those who are living with it because they want to make sure that if you're telling them this product is good for you or this helps, that you understand ALS. So, how is Synchron's approach different from maybe some other companies in whether it's technology or other healthcare fields?
Yeah, I think it's important to know the journey, definitely of a product, for instance. In Synchron's case, our CEO and co-founder, Dr. Tom Oxley, is an interventional neurologist, and spun this company back in 2012 out of the University of Melbourne. So we have roots in Australia. We came over to the States right around 2018, 2019. But really, the concept of our technology is delivering a brain-computer interface into the brain in a minimally invasive fashion. So we're not going through the skull. And that makes us very unique in that we don't require a cradiotomy. We don't require putting a wafer or substrate or an array directly into the brain matter. We're staying in a vessel. And so I bring up an interventional neurologist because these are the types of surgeons, interventional neuroradiologists, interventional neurologists, endovascularly trained neurosurgeons that do procedures in stroke care, or they go in and they provide a neural stent to open up a blood vessel, or a flow diverter away from an aneurysm. So there's an immense magnitude of procedures in stroke care because stroke is one of the most prevalent diseases in the world. And so what we're doing is we're leaning on the immense science and breadth of study within endovascular neurology and delivering our BCI through a microcatheter. So in the very same way that you see so many cardiac surgeries that are performed now that don't require open heart surgery anymore, they work in the arteries. We're taking the same learnings from the cardiac space, interventional cardiology, and bringing technology into the brain that way.
That's incredible because I could imagine now a future where you could get data from the brain or from the person who's using BCI that could tell people about heart health and other kinds of body issues. So a doctor in the future may be able to diagnose things faster or maybe look at the pathway of a disease because of the data they're able to get from the body, from the kind of technology that people are able to use.
You're exactly right, Tony. It's like there's this enormous emergence of digital health related applications. You see them every single day sort of pop up on different app stores. And the idea of taking data insights from the body and be able to help inform a person into maybe what's going on in their blood, for instance, or what's going on with a specific organ. So there definitely is going to be this enormous surge of technologies that are developing more insights and data from the body. Definitely, I think to start, we've been very aligned for the last 12, 13 years, Tony, in that we believe BCI is a medical device, is something that is purposeful for patients with paralysis to start, but there's definitely going to be all sorts of a plethora of different technologies that can come from this. And certainly if we can do it in a more minimally invasive fashion, then that would be good for many, many patients, especially those with ALS.
And I understand that you are really focusing on people's autonomy and independence, and as well as their quality of life, which I imagine is not just a quality of life for a person with ALS, but also their caregiver. So, how do you, when you're approaching technology, focus on things like quality of life and independence?
Yeah, it's a really big question, right? We know that caregivers are so involved, but many patients are completely dependent on their caregivers. And a caregiver, I think, it's a caregiver is really, it's all those that support the patient. And so many times I've been able to see throughout my career, it's kiddos that are helping their parents. And it's like, how do you, so unfortunately, there are some systems at play where a patient has to learn a new technology after they've already lost so much function, because it's the loss of function that qualifies them to be able to get an SGD, for example, or a specific type of access. And there's a concept that we're marching towards, and our chief clinical scientist, Dr. Adam Fry, have spoken about this at a Niels presentation last year, about this concept of lost access time. Essentially, if you were to measure all of the time that a patient spends throughout their day where they don't have access to their assistive technology, to their ability, to their single mode of communication, or their ability to make decisions in their household, then that would be something that would, for one, it would definitely be measurable, and two, there are implications of patients that are losing their ability to communicate, socialize, and go to different, even microenvironments within their home. Just as an example, I worked with a patient up in Alberta, Canada, in which always loved bird watching. For instance, he had ALS and stopped altogether going to the kitchen in his house. And it wasn't because he had ALS that he stopped going to the kitchen in his house. It was because his setup assistance and positioning, his equipment, was set up in a specific room in his house. So we talk about like the ICF model of disability and the fact that as a patient progresses in a disease, they lose their ability to participate. And I've often thought that it's not necessarily the disease or the progression of the disease in this case, so much as it is the technology and the barriers that exist with that, because the technology inherently is outside of the body and requires caregiver assistance.
That's really in tune with human needs, and I appreciate that because you're talking about everyday usability of this technology, right? The BCI is not merely about understanding a yes or no question, but it's about being able to use it safely and simply to for everyday use.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that social connection and isolation is a real thing with this disease. And so if we can march towards something that is integrated, going back to that example that I said about the FDA calling this a motor neural prosthesis, in a very similar way to like a hip prosthetic. When a patient has a new hip, they don't think about, after the healing process, they don't think about getting out of their bed in the morning and then putting their hip implant on, right? It's integrated. It's with them all the times and available to them. In a very similar way, I'd love to be able to march towards a new reality where patients have the ability to interact with the world around them, with those that they want to socialize with, that isn't dependent so much on that caregiver setup and assistance that's available to the patient, even in an emergency scenario. If a patient, we know that sleep is such an issue, not only with the patient with ALS, but also with the caregiver, because they're worried about the patient or who they're caring for. And so even if we were able to deliver as a minimal viable product, Tony, as an MVP, a 24/7 call button, caregiver alert that a patient could send out a signal without needing any motor movement whatsoever, then we think that that's highly valuable. So that's what we're exploring, and we're going to be marching towards that in our next clinical study.
Wow, I can imagine a future not just in the home, but because a lot of people who have advanced diseases like ALS, they may be in a long term care facility, and there are wonderful people working in nursing homes. So I don't want this to sound negative to that, but if people are feeling unsafe with another caregiver, and now they can't communicate that to somebody, they may in the future be able to communicate safety issues where it can help not just with like an emergency need, but about abuse as well. That right now they might not be able to communicate, but in a future with BCI, they could reach out to people when they don't feel comfortable in a situation.
You're exactly right. And we do know that, abuse, neglect are highly underrepresented and underreported in research and literature. So, if a patient's unable to communicate those things, it's very hard to even, have good research and good data for patients that are nonverbal or that are completely dependent on their caregivers, right? Yeah, absolutely.
And what you're saying, and what we believe here at ALS United Mid Atlantic is, even if you're nonverbal, you are still valued as a human being first and foremost, and that needs to be how we lead with all of our care.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think that, hopefully we're able to get to a place, and I know that this wasn't something that we had discussed too. It's like we want to have BCI be an agnostic, positive, +1 technology, and that if a patient is using assistive technology, or they're using an eye tracker, for instance, that a BCI can be helpful. And in the case of, I've spoke about this at length before, the best form of eye tracking is multimodal access, in that a patient's able to use their eyes to navigate, but they have some form of physical movement to select, right? And so in theory, what a BCI would do for a patient with using an eye tracker is it provides them multimodal access because it gives them motor intent as another access method. So it has the ability to raise the bar in a variety of ways. So yeah, we're very hopeful as we progress towards this next phase of our clinical development that we're able to really start highlighting some of the clinical benefit of this technology.
That's amazing. Now, you have done a number of clinical studies. I know something called the switch and command. So, can you give a brief recap on what that means?
Yeah. So Synchron has completed 2 clinical trials already. Our first in human study. So I think it's maybe worth delineating because so many times when folks, especially in ALS, hear about different phases of trials, they think drug trials. So they think phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, those sorts of terms. In med device development, you have something called a first in human, an early feasibility, and then usually a pivotal study. And so what Synchron has done is we've completed our first in human and early feasibility studies. So our first in human was out of Australia. It was a single site at the University of Melbourne. It involved 4 patients, 3 with ALS, 1 with PLS, and primary outcomes were safety. And we met all safety outcomes. So really, these first 2 studies were on safety of procedure. Can patients tolerate this? Do we have good safety data as we continue to follow up at the 3-month, 6-month, 12-month mark? We've continued to follow patients long term. So patients, even from our switch study, which commenced, I believe, back in 2021, if I'm not correct, we've continued to follow them. So we essentially recert patients. So long as they want to continue working with us, we'll go into their homes and we'll ensure that we're aligning the technology with the types of activities that are important and meaningful for patients. So 10 patients total so far, 8 with ALS. Our second study, our first one here in the US, but our second study overall was our command study, involved 5 patients with ALS, 1 with brainstem stroke. And again, primary outcomes were safety. So as we move towards this next phase, our next clinical trial, which will be here in the States once again, of course, we're going to continue to always reassess for safety of the procedure and how the patients tolerate it. But we're really getting to this exciting time where we're going to start really focusing on efficacy, clinical outcomes, clinical benefits of a BCI. What activities are meaningful for a patient in a clinical sense that would warrant getting an implantable brain-computer interface?
It's fascinating to me because we have seen from our researchers that they do genetic studies or drug studies on things like fruit flies or mice, and you can't do that with BCI with a fruit fly or a mouse in the same way. Like you can't ask a mouse to do a PowerPoint presentation. Maybe you can, and I'm not aware of it, but I have a friend who has ALS, and he did a wonderful presentation using his eye gaze computer. And at least at this point, a mouse can't do that. So you have different kinds of risks and assessment that you would do with assessing BCI than you would with genetic therapies or drug therapies.
Yes, absolutely, Tony. And I think what you bring up is a really great point. And what that is it's this technology has to be developed in humans, all right, with human beings using it and us figuring out, what the stop gaps are, what's really impactful for patients, what's less impactful. And as I've painted the picture before, expectations and what a patient wants to do with a BCI is all over the place. So we don't want to design for just one side of that extreme, right? We don't want to make the system that's so simplistic that it doesn't do many of the advanced, more advanced tasks that a patient may want to do. But at the same time, the training, we want to have it be a very low cognitive effort for a patient. So that way it's easy to learn, easy to use. And we want patients to be able to have really good stability as they go about using the system throughout the day.
So, as you just said, you are putting the patient first in this. The patient drives the technology, and then the technology drives what you can do for patients. So, how have people living with ALS and their families kind of shaped your priorities at Synchron? And what are you learning from them and from clinicians to advance your priorities and technology?
Yeah, so we have this saying at Synchron that we're developing this technology based on lived experience. And it's something that we take to heart in a very sincere fashion. So in product development, you have downstream based communications, and there's a really important part of product development, which is called upstream product development, and that you're taking the perspectives of not only your current patients that have the technology, but patients that may be indicated that may wish and may qualify in the future for that technology. And so we've been working with, presenting in ALS support groups. We've been presenting direct to patients and having them inform us on what are the gaps that they're seeing in the technologies they use. as we present and give a baseline presentation of what this technology is, we're incorporating perspectives of not only patients that are interested, but really what are the detractors, what are the concerns, and how do we think about addressing those concerns in a way that is as transparent as possible. Not only what this procedure looks like, but what is the realistic expectations of what a patient might expect when they get a BCI. So what we've done is we've broadcasted. We have a YouTube channel. It's we can tag it after this interview. But we have a wonderful amount of patient demos that we've completed with our patients, showcasing the different types of tasks they've been able to do. And a lot of this isn't conceptual. We've actually been able to demonstrate it. So, for instance, dating all the way back to our switch study. We've had patients being able to email, be able to text, surf the internet, browse the internet, control different aspects of their environment, lights, sounds, and a variety of other tasks. We actually just launched a campaign of one of our patients from our switch study back in Australia using an Apple Vision Pro headset, and partnered with NVIDIA, which is a really big AI partner, to be able to provide contextual cues, contextual labeling around a patient's visual field. So essentially, this patient looks around his house, and as he looks at things that can take a smart signal from like a Wi-Fi signal, he's provided with a user interface to make a selection just off of thought. And so there's a variety of different ways we're trying to showcase what this could look like, but the patients are informing us all the way through. So another thing I wanted to mention is we also have something called UAT, user acceptance testing, where we work with patients that have ALS, and we showcase them different page sets, different pieces of our software. We collect their feedback and their thoughts. Even before we go about crafting a message out to the ALS community, we run it through our UAT group of patients that have come along this journey with us, that interact with our technology, and we ask them for their feedback and their thoughts. Are we getting the message right? Is it easily understandable? So there's a variety of ways that we're doing this, and we're trying to learn, different ways we can explore this. We definitely haven't figured everything out, but we're trying to do as much due diligence as we can.
It's really impressive to see how far this technology has advanced since I started here. And I know that my grandfather had ALS. If he had had this, it would have been such a game changer for him, my grandmother, who was his spouse and caregiver, and everyone else. And what you're saying, it sounds like a video game to me. I was just playing a video game where you browse what's in front of you, and then you see, oh, you're supposed to look over here, find this mission, find this thing, it lights up, and it's just taking something that my 9-year-old might play a video game, but someone who is 59 would also be able to use that same kind of visual cues for BCI, just as he would play a video game.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Really, the last 5 years, even Tony, what's been going on with artificial intelligence, and trying to make tasks, everyday tasks, easier for people in general. And I think that there's a nefarious aspect of AI that people try to paint this picture, and I think at the same time, it's the same advantages of pushing for AI innovation that I think that are going to help a lot of patients in a really tremendous way. And I say that, really a good example is many times, patients have, as people, we have everyday routines. And if there was a way to where a virtual assistant could begin to learn that routine and could begin to prioritize tasks based on the room that you're in as a patient, based on what activities you typically do, what days of the week, then there's a way to make life a lot more manageable, make tasks easier, and make suggestions actually more intelligent, so that essentially, as the patient's using technology, the technology is getting smarter and smarter at understanding the patient's needs and how to prioritize tasks and different selections. Even as the patient looks around the room, how does a patient typically interact in that room? So I think that we're going to see even more innovation as this technology continues to progress.
That's amazing. Now, I understand you have some webinars coming up and maybe more information. So, if people want to participate in your upcoming webinars or learn more about your work, where can they do that?
Yeah, so we've got a couple things. So there is a website, www.synchronbci.com. It's an online community. It's really tremendous in that I talked about this upstream and downstream needs with when you're building a new product. So from an upstream perspective, this is a place where patients and caregivers, as well as clinicians and researchers, really can go to learn about Synchron's brain-computer interface, as well as it provides them with avenues to, if they're so willing, to participate in market research and IRB-approved surveys and a variety of other things to really help inform us on what we're missing and what we really need to be building towards. So that's one way that they can interact with us. So synchronbci.com, as well as we launched a website just recently called learnaboutbci.com, in which if patients go to learnaboutbci.com, they'll find a webinar link. We're going to be launching a national webinar on January 21st that's really made for patients as well as families, really providing a very thorough overview of what our system is and its capabilities. And we're also hoping to be able to have some patients, one of our patients, be able to also provide some information about his experience as well.
Wonderful. I encourage you to please send me updates so that we can share that with our ALS audience, because I'm sure they'll want to see that and be reminded as we get closer to that webinar on January 21st. Now, before we end here, January is in 2026. So is there anything you want us to know about what's coming up in 2026 with your research or studies that you think would be interesting to share?
Yeah, so as I'd mentioned before, we are getting ready to enter into this next phase of our clinical development. We're working with a variety of different geographies across the U.S. We're going to, as much as we can, we're going to expand as quickly as possible, but we're getting ready to gear up for our third clinical trial, our second here in the U.S. And as I mentioned before, it's really going to be prioritized on ALS specifically. We had brainstem stroke in our last study as well as PLS in our first. This is going to be exclusively on ALS. And so I would encourage anybody that's out there that'd be interested of learning more to go to synchronbci.com to sign up in our community. And as soon as our trial becomes active, we will be sending that update through that community first and then expanding outwardly in our communications from there.
Well, Charles, I am really interested to see what happens in 2026. It gives us a lot of hope that there's people who understand ALS that are working on this, because someone else can do it without understanding those patient needs. And, we need to put our patients and families first. So here at ALS United Mid-Atlantic, we're always putting our ALS patients and families first. You can find more information about our work on our podcast. So find past episodes, as I said. Go to our website, www.alsmidatlantic.org, to see our updates, see how you can donate, volunteer, participate in events, and learn about our research. And I'm sure that we'll be working with Charles and Synchron in the future to educate people about updates in BCI. Charles Poeppelman, thank you so much for speaking today. I'm excited about our future partnerships and what we'll do for our patients and families.
Hey, Tony, thanks so much. Appreciate the time.